With Blue Beetle releasing in international theaters worldwide as a part of the DCEU slate for August 2023, this news has raised many eyebrows on the new manager for DC Studios, James Gunn. I'm going to break down why I think the DC Extended Universe needs James Gunn in order for it to economically thrive and organize itself together. Let's go over James Gunn's history as a director in the cinema industry and how it's linked to box office success, shall we? Guardians of the Galaxy, a movie that James Gunn directed for the MCU, got to take home a shy of $730 million in the box office. You heard that right. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, $863 million. As for the DCU, the Suicide Squad actually, I suppose it did flop at the box office with only $168 million. And I mean, I get it. There are going to be people who are going to perceive this loss as a definite economic failure of James Gunn's career. But we're not only talking about, economic prosperity. We're talking about consistency as well. But I'm going to get to that very shortly. At the same time, though, more than half of the reviews for the Suicide Squad have been pretty outstanding, with the exception of angry parents who weren't able to take their children to an R-rated superhero movie, because the Suicide Squad is rated R. So, there's that. And maybe a few people, who want to give Zack Snyder fans a bad name and review bombing the movie just because it's not connected to the Snyderverse, which I think is very childish and counterproductive. But you know what? Other than that, which I think does correlate to the box office failure for the Suicide Squad, that's it. That doesn't say anything more about James Gunn as a director. In fact, people would rather watch the Suicide Squad than Suicide Squad, the first installment. So, on top of that, Peacemaker, which is a direct sequel and spin-off series to the Suicide Squad, is currently rated as the best DC show of all time on HBO. And that's saying something, because A, we're talking about HBO, and to have a best, show of any, genre, or whether it be superheroes or whatever, nothing could top Game of Thrones. So to have Peacemaker, although it didn't exceed the numbers that Game of Thrones managed to get, it still managed to draw subscribers into the HBO Max streaming service, which proves that James Gunn is a brilliant storyteller, because there are people subscribing to have access to his stories, movies, TV shows. Like, they know that James Gunn is brilliant at that. It shows with James Gunn's directing style, the way that he utilizes the lens for each creative shot. This leads to my first conclusion that I'm going to make in light of the positive reception of James Gunn, as well as his commercial success in the past with Marvel. The DCEU needs James Gunn's insightful leadership in order for them to consolidate bank in the box office once again. And no, I'm not talking about the Joker or the Batman. Those aren't DC extended movies. They are standalones. Although, James does run the whole DC division. But I don't think he's going to touch the Joker or the Batman. Because, A, it would be kind of reckless and stupid to tamper with it, even for James Gunn, because the directors who've made Todd Phillips for the Joker and Matt Reeves for the Batman, the directors who made those motion pictures, from storyboarding it to the actual production value, the screenplay narrative, they've done a very impeccable job with those movies. But right now I'm specifically talking about the DC Extended Universe, which I think is more of James Gunn's forte. I want to discuss one more thing in regards to why this DC Extended Universe needs a person like James Gunn. Guys, the DCEU is not consistent. It just isn't. Like, this problem began with Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, a movie which I immensely love, and it's one of those motion pictures where I'm like, why can't other people appreciate the beauty of this movie as well? But you have to admit, finishing a Batman Dark Knight trilogy and then suddenly announcing that there is going to be a recasted version of Bruce Wayne in another universe confused a lot of people. And by many people, I'm referring to the average moviegoer who isn't that invested in entertainment and casting news. All those people see are the trailers and posters in the malls, sidewalk. Like, they don't know the context, nor should they. It is the movie's job to sit them down, okay, and explain why a character looks different. That being stated, the DC Extended Universe started to become what I like to call a legitimized multiverse. Yeah, I think that's a nice word to put it. Where you have one actor playing the same character as another actor or actress. And as a result of that confusion, it minimizes the enjoyment of the viewer just relaxing to watch it in the cinema. And then we have the Justice League, or the Joss League, as many people rightfully call it, because that's been sabotaged by Joss Whedon. Like, don't get me started on that. Basically, one director sabotaged another director's vision and turned it into an absolute shitfest. Like, even to this day, we don't know which Justice League is canon. Like, I know many people are like, you know, and again, they're right in thinking that, Zack Snyder's Justice League brought in a lot more success than the other version. So, naturally, they canonized that, right? Well, the reality is we don't know, because it seems like they want to part ways with Zack Snyder. And I'm pretty sure they already did. Yeah, they did. They don't want nothing to do with him anymore. And if we are even going to get going in building up to a evil Superman nightmare movie where Lois Lane dies and then Superman gets manipulated into erasing the world because Darkseid uses anti-life, and the Joker, probably going to be played by Jared Leto, manipulates him as well. We don't know if in Aquaman, when Mera tells Arthur that he stopped Steppenwolf, well, that could mean, either one of the two versions, the Joss Whedon version and the Zack Snyder version. If Mera is referring to the Snyder version, when Aquaman stabbed him with his trident, which is more of a, useful part in defeating Steppenwolf and Joss Whedon, then that makes sense for Aquaman. Or it could also make sense that from the ugly version of Justice League, where Aquaman was practically obsolete and got the credit and participation trophy because he's part of the team. As I said before, and will continue to say, the DC universe lacks the consistency in order for it to thrive in a world where average moviegoers can easily be confused. It doesn't matter if he recast War Machine with Don Cheadle, because it took a while for the MCU to recover from that one recast. And then we have, the Hulk recasted of Mark Ruffalo. And I get it. Because they've managed to stay consistent and not recast the Hulk again, people started to, love Mark Ruffalo. But the DCEU recasts a character as if it's another Tuesday. That's the difference between the DCEU and Marvel. Marvel has more consistency. talking about Marvel Studios, where it's all an interconnected cinematic universe. But the DCEU isn't that consistent. This might very well change with James Gunn, though, because the Suicide Squad. You know what? Let me tell you something about the Suicide Squad. The Suicide Squad is meant to be a sequel to the first Suicide Squad picture, but James Gunn decided to, direct the Suicide Squad sequel in a way that it could still be its own standalone movie, without recasting any important characters, which again, DCEU seems to enjoy doing a lot behind the scenes, and keeping characters like Rick Flag and Harley Quinn consistent, which meant that Suicide Squad and Birds of Prey remained consistently canon, which reduced the audience's confusion. So even though those movies are bad, and we acknowledge that it's set in a universe with those two, mediocre movies, like, tell me, does the MCU decide to make Iron Man 2 not canon just because it wasn't as well as they expected it to be? No. In fact, they acknowledge movies like For the Dark World that haven't resonated with the wider fan base and average moviegoer audience as successfully. They build it up to a tentpole movie event like Endgame or Infinity War. They don't just ignore the past, they embrace it. They acknowledge their mistakes, and they just allow it to elevate the next movie. In fact, I think there are people who've watched the Suicide Squad, and I've only watched 30 minutes of Suicide Squad, not the Suicide Squad, the mediocre one. And I've heard many people saying that Rick Flag was a highlight from that movie. And Harley Quinn. Maybe because Margaret Robbie plays her, and that's, she's sexy. So, listen, all of that, not ignoring their past failures when it came to the Suicide Squad, by James Gunn making the Suicide Squad as a sequel, but a sequel that everyone who hasn't watched the other ones could watch, it made the Suicide Squad a much enjoyable viewing experience. James Gunn is comprehensive of how to achieve tonal balance. A little bit of light and a little bit of darkness. Sometimes it's the one of the other is a bit more, but there's still a balance. One moment he adds in a comedic scene, but then if you start to peel off that funny, scene, like a complexly layered onion, you could see that there is a darkness hidden in it. And it makes the scene more authentic and immersive. Like, the same applies for scenes that are meant to be serious. And I know Peacemaker is a television show, but when Peacemaker has to kill his father in episode 7, Vigilante, as funny as his attempt of cheering up his best friend was when it came to the visuals on the screen, it was also genuinely painful to watch, because although it's funny that Vigilante is trying, he's also incapable of feeling actual emotion, but he's trying to. And that's what James Gunn wants to convey. We need a director like James Gunn to provide the DCEU with such economic prosperity, consistency, and a clever tonal shift that just adds caliber nuance to the motion blockbuster picture like The Suicide Squad. I would now like to pose a question to my viewers out there tuning in to this fabulous cinema courtroom show. What do you think about whether or not the DC Extended Universe needs a creative head like James Gunn? Do you think that maybe hiring him to operate DC Studios was a lapse of judgment on Warner Brothers' part? Oh, and also next week we are going to talk about James Gunn's whole reboot for the DCEU. I didn't forget about that, so we're going to cover it in another segment. Anyways, do you think that James Gunn is the best thing to happen for the DCEU universe? Maybe you don't. Who knows? Whichever your thoughts are, let me know in the comment section below, or our Twitter inbox at Cinema Courtroom.